Imagine opening a yellowed letter, carefully sealed with red wax, only to discover that inside there's no reply, just silence stamped on the blank paper. Being ignored in the 19th century wasn't just waiting for a notification that never arrived. It was feeling the weight of an absence that dragged on for weeks, sometimes months. You who dared to write sweet words, confusing poems, or declarations of intent are stuck waiting for the mailman. Every hooves on the cobblestone street makes your heart race. But when the mail arrives, if it arrives, the empty envelope is the loudest sound anyone could ever return to you. Ignoring in those days was a delicate weapon. Saying no out loud could be scandalous, but returning silence was refined, socially acceptable, and devastating. Silence was the preferred slap in the face among ladies, gentlemen, and even relatives who cut ties with the power of an ink pen. You watch your hope dissolve in lukewarm tea amid whispered gossip in drawing rooms. The lack of response becomes the talk of those who pretend not to care. And every sidelong glance, every wave of a fan reinforces the message, you no longer exist in their world. But the 19th century was unforgiving to sensitive hearts. For some, such silence was a public shame. For others, it was reason enough to scratch a glove across another man's face. Because if a young woman failed to respond to a courtship proposal, perhaps it was simply vanity. But if a gentleman dared to ignore a letter, that was a matter of honor. And honor back then was washed in the open field in the morning mist with loaded pistols and nervous witnesses holding white handkerchiefs. A no could turn into a duel. Silence, then, could cost blood. You imagine the scene, waking up before the sun, putting on your best coat, feeling the cold air sting your face as your feet tread the damp grass. All this because someone didn't have the courage to say a single word, "I don't want to." On the other side, the offended party, his face red, his gloves still covered in dust, his trembling hand gripping a gleaming pistol. 2 shots, an excuse to maintain honor, and the family rested in peace in the ballroom. But not all silence turned to gunpowder. For many, it was a slow poison. You sit by candlelight, rereading the letter you sent 1,000 times in your head. Maybe the delivery got lost, you think. Maybe the recipient is sick, busy, distracted. Hope in this theater is the ultimate executioner. The girls, imprisoned by corsets and conventions, used silence as a wall. An inconvenient gentleman received no response, and the message spread, "She doesn't want you." As for those rejected, the only option was to wait, persist, or bury themselves in dramatic verses scribbled in diaries. And don't think it was just romance. Friends ignored each other over unpaid debts, relatives over inheritance disputes. A silence could echo for generations. Children were born without knowing why 2 neighboring families never exchanged words, but they inherited the grudge as if it were a family heirloom. You could try to explain yourself, send more letters, show up at the door, ask favors from acquaintances. But each unanswered attempt was like driving the knife of embarrassment deeper into the hole. The 19th century was kind on the surface, cruel in its details.
For some, the only option was to escape, travel to another city, try to rebuild their reputation in another salon, find another heart to try to beat. But the silence clung to their skin like cheap perfume. All it took was a new rumor for it all to start over again. And there were those who wrote letters that were never sent, kept in wooden boxes, hidden under mattresses, marked with dates and dried tears. Witnesses to a rejected affection, an ignored request, a maybe that never became a yes. Thus, being ignored in the 19th century wasn't just about not having an answer. It was about carrying an invisible weight on your chest, one that spread through the tea circles, the chandelier-lit salons, the cobblestone streets where the carriage wheels seemed to laugh at your hope. And if you were there, you would know. Nothing hurts more than the sound of a sealed envelope that doesn't arrive or arrives empty. Because back then, silence wasn't peace. It was a sentence. You watched the seasons pass from your window. Fragrant spring, sweltering summer, damp autumn, fingertip freezing winter, but no response arrives. Meanwhile, those who ignore you go on with their lives intact, dancing at balls, smiling at dinner parties, laughing at jokes that have nothing to do with you. Sometimes a part of you wants to scream. It wants to burst into someone's home, shake their shoulders, demand words, anything to break the emptiness. But you know, society will swallow you if you lose control. Silence is cruel because it forces you to swallow every slurred word, every tear swallowed along with the cold tea. For some, silence was punishment. For others, a form of control. Between torn letters and unspoken words, many manipulated destinies. A woman who doesn't respond can make room for another. A partner who no longer accepts invitations can ruin an entire business, all without saying a single word. And you, sitting at the table, pen in hand, feel your back ache as you write yet another letter. Long, dramatic, filled with apologies or promises. You sign it, seal it, pay the delivery person. Then you wait, and wait, and wait. Meanwhile, whispers erupt through the narrow streets. The seamstress knows, the coachman comments, the butler confides. In the 19th century, everyone knew everything except you, who remained ignored, alone in a room lit by a candle that insisted on dying. And if the answer ever comes, it's as cold as a glass of water in winter. Maybe a short, emotionless note telling you to stop writing. Maybe an invitation to talk, too late, when the silence has already devoured what hope remained. Some people write memoirs about it years later. Former romantics, old duelists, aging ladies who keep envelopes like relics. For all of them, the silence of the 19th century was the ghost that danced in the living room, prowled the hallways, slept at the foot of the bed. Today, ignoring seems easy. A click, an unread message. But back then, every silence was torture staged with feathers, perfume, and blank stares. And if you had the choice, you might prefer a brutal no to weeks of waiting for a carriage that never stops at your door. To be ignored in the 19th century was to die slowly, suffocated by the weight of unspoken words, torn by the sharp edges of letters that never came. It was drama, it was scandal, it was a reputation tarnished by impeccable handwriting. And above all, it was the certainty that back then, silence screamed loudly. Loud enough to bury you without the need for a single pistol bullet or sword edge.